All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Divine Nature Podcast. Thanks for joining me today. I'm going to talk about a few things today, and hopefully we'll have less glitches, and problems. But let's see what we can get into. Okay, number one, I want to talk about a number of things today on the agenda. Today on the Dividing Line. I watched too much of James White. The Divine Nature Podcast. Sustainable education philosophy that threatens to usurp parental rights. A reading on the article by Alex Newman, and I'm going to also go into defining parental rights, property rights, and I'm going to read an article by Tom DeWeese, and then we're going to talk a little bit about should we repeal the 19th Amendment, responding to a popular CNN interview of Pastor Doug Wilson. So let's get into that. Stand by. Welcome to the Divine Nature Podcast. Check out divinenature.net for more podcasts, videos, blogs, and commentary from a Christian and biblical worldview perspective. All right, so let's go into a definition of the 19th Amendment. Okay, it's a simple definition. I looked it up. I wasn't in the habit of looking these things up, right? I might have read it before a long time ago, but let's get into it, okay? The 19th Amendment, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Congress shall have no power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. Okay? So that's the 19th Amendment. All right, so today I want to go through some of the subjects that I've picked up concerning what's going on in Chicago, okay, and talk a bit about property rights as well, being that I myself, I'm an investor, I'm a landlord. Okay, I want to discuss a bit on the issue of the 19th Amendment and voting rights, along with revisiting the issue of Christian nationalism. I think I might have touched a little bit on Christian nationalism, but I don't think I got too deep into it. But it's interesting because it comes up a lot with this issue of Christianity and the culture and voting and politics. So it intersects religion and politics perfectly. It's a milk and coffee of an issue, okay? And you can't avoid it. This is the epitome. This is the epitome of having that conversation at the Thanksgiving Day table that people say do not have. This is probably has separated more people from their families than anything else in this country. Okay? So, okay, let's see. I want to get into an article. Let me pull this article up. Okay. Let me pull this article up at the Liberty Sentinel. It's a Alex Newman article. And I'm going to recommend the book by Alex Newman soon. But let's read. Okay, it's libertysentinel.org. And the title is Chicago Expands Parental Replacement Centers Disguised as Schools. Okay, Chicago's government school system is doubling down, literally, on its Sustainable Community Schools, SCS program to take over more and more functions once reserved for families, voluntary associations and churches. It's all part of a push for equity, quote unquote, officials said. Under the new plan, the city will be expanding from 20 sustainable community schools to almost twice as many for the 2025-26 school year. The August 4 announcement by city officials, union bosses, and government education chiefs came even as the district faces a staggering $734 million budget hole. The idea behind sustainable, quote unquote, sustainable community schools is to provide what government educators refer to as more services, quote unquote, and even, quote unquote, wraparound services under the so-called, quote unquote, village model. Everything from mental health and dental health to nutrition and quote unquote, family well-being becomes the government school's responsibility. Okay, so this is kind of like where I want to go, okay, on this conversation of how this philosophy uh, usurps parental parental rights. Okay, and I did a video recently. Okay, on, and what did I title that? How what exactly did I name that? Okay, I thought I wrote. I forgot my uh how it has to do with usurping parental rights. I did a video on that. I did a podcast on that. And what it is basically there's different ways, okay, that the system usurps parental rights, okay? And he comes in here with ideas, with philosophies, with, different worldviews. And basically, those who are dependent upon the government will end up falling for this, right? Because they're dependent upon the government. They've got nowhere else to go, right? And so the usurping of parental rights cannot come unless there's a usurping of major institutions, centers of learning, our media, all of that stuff, right? That's how it works. So let's continue with the article. The idea behind sustainable community schools is to provide what government educators refer to as more, quote unquote, services and even wraparound services. Okay, think of them as parental and church replacement centers within the institutions. Everything for children, but the bedtime stories and goodnight hugs for now become the responsibility of the state. Even parents can receive myriad, quote unquote, services from the government schools as they become the new community hub, quote unquote. That means more mental health support, more mentorship programs, more community-oriented events, more access to resources for jobs, housing. Radical left-wing Mayor Brandon Johnson said that at the press conference announcing the massive expansion of the controversial program as if it were government's job to feed and house the population. Ironically, junk, quote unquote, studies notwithstanding, the model has already proven to be an utter failure in Chicago when it comes to educating children. Consider the prominent, quote unquote, sustainable community school known as Richard's Academy in Chicago, which was supposed to show how successful the program would be. It's true, the school graduated about 2/3 of its victims in 4 years, but Illinois State Board of Education, the school did not have one single student proficient in either reading or math or standardized test. How they graduated without a basic proficiency in anything remains a mystery. Yes, really, despite squandering some $4,000 more in taxpayer money per student, The model, quote unquote, sustainable community school could not produce a single student proficient in any core subject. That is worse than even traditional government schools. Almost 80% of the students were chronically absent at the academy, too. State data also shows. And yet, thanks to a rapidly growing stream of federal and state funding, the community school, quote unquote, model of expanding across Chicago and nationwide incredibly, even as the atrocious data from the Richards Academy was being publicized, Chicago, quote unquote, educators celebrated the model. We have committed to an entire union to using our contract to create more sustainable community schools like Richards Academy. Okay, so this idea of sustainable, and this is a word, this is a phrase, a word that should ring a bell and should yell out to us globalism. Okay, globalism should this is what we should perk our ears to this whenever somebody's talking about what is sustainable, right? And we should look back to early 90s globalist agenda, United Nations program of sustainable development. And this is what people had been talking about for a long time. And I'm going to recommend a couple of books. First of all, The Crime of the Educators is a book that I bought by Alex Newman, co-written by I forgot his name. It was Alex Newman and Golden. I forgot his co-author, but and the other book is Sustainable by Tom DeWeese, and I'm going to play an excerpt by Tom DeWeese explaining what is sustainable development. And sustainable development was the first wording, was the first exposure to all things sustainable. Okay, going back to the 90s, 17 goals from the UN, from the United Nations. Okay, and how everything, all of these things, all of these institutions were going to be brought together to meet 17 goals, and they were going to work towards all type of thing, no poverty, zero hunger, all this stuff, world health, good health all over the world, quality education for everyone, gender equality, okay, sanitize the water and the oceans, all this stuff. And it was going to be a global thing. And a lot of people are familiar with this. Some people are not, some younger people are not. But this is something, and this is what all brings it together. And education is one of those things. Okay. And sadly, oftentimes these people don't realize that they're useless dummies for these programs. And they don't see the connection, because these programs, this system, which is a globalist collectivism system, is usurping the sovereignty of nations to in order to bring all of these things under their hub, in a globalist hub. And I've done podcasting on globalization and globalism, on the what I call the beast system, and that's my overall phrase for what all of this is. To me, it's a beast system that brings all of this, because we know that in the scriptures, in last end times prophecy, we understand that there's going to be a globalist system, and most uh, eschatological thoughts on this and views incorporate an understanding of this beast system and the coming of together of a globalist power. All right. So let's listen to uh, uh, Tom DeWeese explain what sustainable actually is and sustainable development. Hang on a second. So what it is, it's a whole mask system, right? It's a globalist thing that presents itself as governmental programs, right? But what it is being backed by globalist powers, okay? Um, and what people don't see is that they see it like even to this day, despite how open the globalists are online, and for the fear of sounding like Alex Jones, I mean he does get a lot correct. I have to say, as wacky as he is, wacky doesn't mean that he's not right sometimes. But the issue is that they're it's a globalist power, and it's usurping governments in order to get these things done. And what it does is it rides the waves of the need that exist, but it usurps the power in order to become the power and remain the power, and to put uh, not only people and but governments under their subjection, right? And so they have these 17 goals, right? Uh, End poverty in all its forms everywhere. Okay. End hunger, achieve food security and improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. But how do they do that? They can only do that by taking control of the food systems, right? Of the transportation, uh, of foods. Okay. That's how they're going to do that. They have to control in order to uh, they have to usurp in order to do anything about these things, right? Ensure healthy lives and promote well being for all at all ages. Okay. What does that mean? That probably means mandated vaccines. Okay. Because you're going to be healthy, what we consider healthy, right? We're calling those shots, right? Uh, Goal 4, ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Okay, so we've reached here my subject, okay, my bottom line subject in terms of the usurping of parental rights. You can only do this, right, if you decide what is equality, what is equitable, what is promoting lifelong learning opportunities, right? You have to decide these parameters. Inclusivity, mental health, all of these things, gender equality, achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. See that? Okay. But yet, do the globalists care about destroying the women and the little girls in the womb? No. In fact, they empower abortion. Okay. They call that as a rights, reproductive rights. That's how they would define it. But here, they're saying that they need to empower all women and girls. Not by killing them, you won't. Okay, goal number 6, ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. Ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. Promote inclusive and sustainable economic growth full of productive employment and decent work for all, right? That could also be the income, a daily income, what they call the daily income, I think it's called. Build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. Reduce inequality within and among countries. Make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. Oh, there's so many of them. Take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. According to these folks, what we call climate change is not for a debate. Okay, conserve and sustainability use the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. Protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of what is that? Territorial ecosystem, sustainability management, forest, combat forest desertification, and half and reverse land degradation, and half biodiversity loss. Promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. And number 17, strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. All of these things, you see, all of these things are based on what they consider sustainable. That's what they're calling it. It's they're defining all of these things, right? And their definitions mean conclusions that we're not all going to agree with. Okay, so once again, let's see here. So that is the issue. Now, continuing on, okay, and yet, back to the article, and yet, thanks to rapidly growing stream of federal and state funding, the quote-unquote community school model is expanding across Chicago and nationwide, incredibly, even at the atrocious data, as the atrocious data from the Richards Academies was being publicized, Chicago quote-unquote educators celebrated the model. We have committed, quote, we have committed as an entire union to using our contract to create more sustainable community schools like Richards Academy, unquote, said Chicago Teachers Union boss Stacy Davis Gates at a press conference last year, calling it the type of school community, unquote, that is necessary to nurture, to educate, to reimagine, to ameliorate injustice and disparity. Okay? The question is, do these people know that they are being useless dummies for a governmental program that has compromised itself to globalist powers? Do they know this? Okay, so I'm going to play a clip on something that she says. Now, Alex Jones here discusses that she says Davis was also in the news more recently for claiming that children belong to government schools. Speaking to a crowd during a speech at the City Club of Chicago, she referred to writer and civil rights activist James Baldwin before going on a bizarre tirade. Okay, so let's listen to what she's saying, and we're going to assess her thinking. Oops, let's go back. It's not where I want to go. Here we go. Wait.
of workers who maintain the park where we get to actually see each other outside of our divisions. And the connectedness of people and institutions and how they help us form community. The attack on the idea of community is exactly the point. Take, for instance, all of the right-wing outrage over my sister, bilingual music teacher and unionist Kat Zamarin, one of the speakers at our November rally. She quotes brilliantly and perfectly American philosopher James Baldwin. Baldwin says, the children are always ours.
Always. Always.
Every single one of them, all over the globe. And what comes next is, CT, you think your children are its children. Yes, we do. We do. We do. CTU thinks all children belong to it, and there's socialist conspiracy ideology. Well, I don't know about all that, but we like children. We educate them, we nurture them, we protect them, we support them, we negotiate for them, we create space for them. We even have them in our homes. But for real, you guys, in community, we belong to each other. That's the whole point of community.
Keep it real.
We have to love each other in community. We have to see each other in community. What is it? Our stakes today.
Well, see, okay, so that's anyone who's listening to this woman will say, what's wrong with what she's saying? She's talking about community. Community is a good thing. She's talking about our children, right? So when she's speaking our children because she may be a mother. The teachers are parents themselves, and the kids, that there's nothing wrong with, caring about other people's kids and calling them, okay, they're part of our family here. This community thing. But the problem is that there's a history. There's a history of the disconnect that someone like that should know. Okay, when they're talking to people, many people who are not aware of that disconnect in that language and those words like sustainable, like community, like village, those things, right? When you hear those are buzzwords that when you hear them, you need to realize what exactly they're talking about, what they're referring to. And the people who empower these folks, the people that they look up to, are people who were pretty extreme. They weren't people who were on the fence or they were mistaken about what they believed or what they thought. They might have thought that what they were doing was right, but if you get someone who's warped, right? If someone who's warped has an example of morality, what are you going to get? His good intentions aren't that good because the person is warped, or you can say the person is wrong, right? If the person is wrong on something, right, he's utilizing a wrong contraption in order to get to the same goal, and he's just going to be wrong, right? So it's a worldview issue. But bottom line, that's what it's about. It's a worldview issue. And so when people are undercover activists, right, and they have an agenda behind them. Some may not know the extent of what's going on or what's behind them or what's empowering them. They may have a focus of only where they want to go from A to B, but they're going to be taken to C to D to E to F and further because of their passions to get things done. So this woman might have been a teacher before, right? And they're promoting these programs, but the question is how how dedicated are they to this socialism that you know are they openly socialist? Some of them are. Some of them are. And they're not, openly analyzing when they talk about, our children. They're in our homes. They're talking about our children, but we have to understand what they mean by being raised by the village. We're talking about actual parents versus the state, right? That's what we're talking about. So when you talk, when you're a union official, you need to be very clear as to what you're referring to. Okay, so you've got opposers because they believe that you're saying something else, that you've got an agenda, right? And if you raise that, if you clear your mind on these things, and you say, well, this is not what I mean, and I know people feel uncomfortable about this. No, this is not where we're going. No, but when you see that a person does not talk like that, when they're not careful with their language, it's probably because they're deceptive. They're deceptive. And so we have to be careful for that. And in Chicago, man, there is already a long growing generation of this type of deception and socialism that's going on. Anyone who's at the level of where this woman is, you can best believe they are not just misguided. Okay? They are there for a reason. They're handpicked to be there to push and to empower an agenda. That's straight up. Okay? So here I want to see, okay, let me see. So, all right, so let me continue reading this article. Chicago Public Schools already spend $10 million annually for its existing 20 quote unquote sustainable community schools. And with the CPS facing a $750 million budget shortfall this year, officials are working to extort taxpayers across the state and the nation for even more cash to step in and fill the gap. The challenges that we are facing, this quote, the challenges that we're facing are severe, Mayor Johnson said, claiming that more taxpayer spending on services, quote unquote, for students would be addressed the root cause, quote unquote, of violence. Quote, so here's what I can say in that. As a collective, we're working to ensure that, this year's budget allows for these investments to be maintained. So this is the Mayor Johnson of that school, okay, is all for all of this. And I'm going to quote, I think this is the Mayor Johnson. I have another clip here with Mayor Johnson where he's talking about these sustainable school programs.
Chicago Public Schools is celebrating a new milestone alongside Mayor Brandon Johnson this morning.
Sustainable community schools provides wraparound services, resources, partnerships into our schools so that students and families have access to what they need every single day to thrive. And today I'm proud to announce that 16 more schools, almost double the current number of sustainable community schools, will begin to transform community schools in this coming year.
There are now 36 sustainable community schools across the city. The 16 that were added today include Austin, Belmont Cragen, and Englewood. As you heard from the mayor, the goal is for every student to have access to a world-class education within walking distance of their home. CPS has plans to reach 70 total sustainable community schools by the 2027 school year.
So you see that they're opening up more of these schools, and they want to have a lot more. And it's been reported that these schools aren't even successful. They're not doing very well. Okay, they're not graduating people at all with proficiency in any core curriculum, any core courses in math and reading. None of that. It's been reported, and so this is wide open, and they're just doing what they want to do. It's just a usurping of the children in Chicago. Okay, forcing an issue, forcing a situation where it's not even successful. It's literally harming. It's literally a harming the children. Okay, because whatever is not working has to be harming. And so they're continuing on a program that is all it's doing is indoctrination and teaching kids how to think instead of, or rather, what to think instead of how to think. And so this continues on and on. And so this is how this ends up usurping parental rights. And I did a podcast on that recently, how all of this, because it's like an umbrella system to meet the needs of the children from the very top. Okay, it's this whole idea of sustainability in community schools. Okay, to give the families everything that they need, but the problems continue. Okay, the problems continue in the system. And so we have to be careful with these things, because these programs are coming to a city near you. And so if they're going to get involved with how our parents, whether you know that this also will involve radical left-wing politics and mentalities and all that stuff, and studies and racism and dividing the nation more and more, because it's being led by extremists. Okay, you can only imagine. And so the other issue is the idea of private property. Okay, private property. I want to see if I can get into that at this point. Stand by. I shall return. So, private property also affects a lot in terms of this whole sustainable stuff. A lot of it goes after private property. The government tries to gain hold of properties and farms and real estate for the sake of protecting wildlife and protecting all of these things. And so I would imagine some of those things are concerning. Remember when I told you that they jump on a concern, they ride a wave of a concern, whether it's crime, whether it's racism, whether it's all of these things where we know exist, right? But they ride on those things in order to try to control and bring regulation, you see? And so that in itself can be a problem. So I want to read a definition of the U.S. Constitution and how it protects the private property rights, okay, and as detailed in the Fifth Amendment. Okay, so let's see. The U.S. Constitution protects private property property rights through the Fifth Amendment's takings clause, and the 14th Amendment due process clause. The Fifth Amendment states that the private property cannot be taken for public use without just compensation. Now, this is kind of scary because as you read it directly from the Constitution, it makes it seem like, well, if we just toss money at you, we can take your property. Okay, and that's a problem because that right there, in my opinion, doesn't seem to be very clear in the document in the wording. And the 14th Amendment extends this protection and due process requirements to state and local governments. This means that governments can use eminent domain to take private land for public projects, but it must pay the owner fair market value. Okay, right? So that's a problem. Okay, let's see what this means in practice. Eminent domain: the government has the power to take private property for public purposes. However, this power is limited by the requirement to provide just compensation. Now, hang on a second. I have a problem with my microphone here. Let's see. Okay, regulatory takings. Governments can also restrict the use of property through regulations. While this doesn't involve outright seizure of the property, it must also follow due process and just compensation principles, although these can be more complex. Now, I'm doing an AI on this. And to be honest, AI almost seems like they're being a little bit on the left side to these things while defining it. Of course, I'm typing this up on Google. Okay. Judicial interpretation. The Supreme Court's interpretation of public use, quote unquote, can influence how these rights are applied. In the 2005 case of Kalo versus City of New London, broadened the concept of public use to include economic development that benefits the public, though many states responded with laws to further restrict eminent domain. So these things can be seriously fought and dealt with in terms of of defending whether the government can seize a property, with by way of eminent domain, and a lot more needs to be looked on in terms of that. Okay, but I want to read an article written by Tom DeWeese entitled "Private Property Rights Are the Key to Freedom." Let me see, make sure all my parameters are doing what they're supposed to. Everything looks good. And let us continue. Okay. So the increasing encroachment of government regulations, pontificating politicians, and the enforcement of social justice schemes have led to a loss of understanding of the terms private property, and property rights. It was once understood that the unauthorized entering of private property was a violation to the utmost. The property owner was justified in supported in taking necessary actions to remove the trespasser and secure that land. Now, we're seeing this a whole lot of this going on in many different cities where you have to be very careful how you defend your home. Okay. Article. Today, such ideas are considered radical, old-fashioned, out of touch, or even reprehensible. The homeowner can be arrested for defending against an armed intruder. The intruder can actually sue a homeowner for shooting them, even as the intruder breaks down the door intending to rob and do harm. Home protection is called violence, perhaps even racism. It's a whole new world of compliance, fear, and acceptance rather than pride, protection, and prosperity and ownership. So if we are to succeed in restoring the ideals of property ownership and benefit from the prosperity and freedom it creates, then a short discussion of the full definition of private property is in order. In the beginning of the nation, after the Declaration of Independence and the American Revolution and the signing of the Treaty of Paris with Great Britain, the American people became complete sovereign freeholders in the land with the same prerogatives as the king once had. Now, in this new nation, the English king had no further claim to the land and could not tax or otherwise encumber it. From that point, the United States government acknowledged private ownership by issuing land patents, also called letter patents. They were signed by the President of the United States and recorded in the county record. From the point the land then became the owner's property in a true land title, quote unquote. There were no other claims on the land patents, or allodial allodial titles, quote unquote, were one of the major motivators of the American Revolution, providing rights to the land free and clear of the liens and encumbrances of the King of England. Land patents are a contract or document of title issued by government for the conveyance of some portion of land from the public domain to private individuals. According to Black's law, a land patent contract means the complete and absolute ownership of land, a paramount and individual right of property in land. But as expert Ron Gibson has written, the enjoyment of free and clear title, allowing owners to, quote, own their land without interference from any government, including the government of the United States, didn't last long, writes Gibson. Quote, as a result of generations of constructive trust fraud perpetuated against the American people, we've been conned into believing we are owning property when in fact, and by law, we're only in possession of property, utilizing it as a renter or tenant would, so long as we pay our rent, example, taxes and mortgages, get the licenses, pay the fees, have it insured, regulated, zoned, and permitted. We can still remain in possession. Gibson goes on to say, our land patent laws were largely derived from the Old English laws known as allodial patents, which means the king of your land. Once a patent has been issued by the United States government, signed by the President of the United States, and recorded in the county recorder's records in which the land is located, it then becomes your fee simple title owing to no one, meaning a true land title. Okay? Today, this history has been largely ignored by our government. Instead of the land patent or allodial patent issued when one buys property, we are issued a warranty deed. That is not a true title, but rather a quote unquote color of title. That means you have a partner in the ownership of the land. The partner is the state, which encumbers the property with taxes and liens and all those things, which simply render you a tenant on what should be your own land. So this is the charade and the nonsense that is extremely unconstitutional. This article was by, once again, by hang on a second. By Tom DeWeese, and it's in libertysentinel.org. You can check that out at your time. And so, yeah, just to show you what exactly is going on, because a lot of people don't know this. A lot of people do not recognize that this is what's going on here. All right? This is what's going on. We are not the owners of our own domain. We truly are not. We are basically tenants in our own homes. Okay? After we pay off our homes, guess what? We have to pay, taxes. We have to continue paying taxes, school taxes. All these go into the property taxes. We have to continue fixing our homes. We have to continue, even after we retire, we have to continue doing this. And so this is the trap that we found ourselves in, and allowing, because we allowed these things to happen, and we move more and more further away from our Constitution, right? And so, yeah, that's the ordeal we're in with private property. And our property rights. Okay, so parental rights being threatened, and our property rights being threatened. The struggle continues. All right, so let's go on to our next subject before we close today. Should we repeal the 19th Amendment? Now, how can I introduce this? The 19th, I heard an interview was going on and popular on YouTube now. Doug Wilson was interviewed by CNN, and CNN basically he opened up that he believed in the repealing of the 19th Amendment. Okay, so at first I kind of felt like, wait a minute, you know what? I don't think we need to go there, because our union is filled with people calling themselves various families, but we as Christians, we recognize our Christian worldview by the standard of the scriptures itself, that we should indeed count ourselves as a family based on family, right? There's no thing about the fact that there's nothing in the Bible that talks about a voting system the way we can freely discuss here. Okay. In fact, the biggest tripping hazard to this idea is the fact that Paul spoke about households where there were believing and non-believing members, right? The problem is it said that the non-believing spouse is sanctified or set apart. Okay. It says the same thing about that the children are set apart as well. So I don't believe that that's speaking about that they're justified. I do believe that they're set apart, right, in a type of God's grace that I cannot argue of here, because I don't have exactly something prepared to be able to argue this point. But I will say that it does mention that there are family groups. It doesn't speak that this is an ideal. It's understood and it's implied that it's not an ideal situation where believers and non-believers come together in a union. It's because when the person became faithful, when they came to faith, right, in the Lord, there were still members of their household that were not saved, right? That's just opening up in the honesty and the reality of that being the case. But that does not mean that it's ideal. Obviously, the narrative argues against that. It argues that it is ideal if the whole family comes together to recognize Christ, right? So under that, I do agree with Douglas Wilson when he says that a family should be counted in voting. Our vote should be counted based on families. I agree. But the reality doesn't speak of that. Now, if let's say the law were to say, okay, so your family, and now you can have only one vote because you're counting as a family, because there are other families from different denominations and different religions, right? If you want to do that for you, now they would probably say, no, I'm not going to do that unless I'm not going to vote for one out of my household, because then it becomes a numbers game. And even though there are families out there that are illegitimate families and people voting, there aren't families, there'll be a greater vote and they'll outvote me, right? And so I don't think they would argue that that's the case. I don't think that they're arguing that it should be repealed in that basis. I think they're saying that that's the way it should be. And I agree. It should be that way. Every vote should be per family, per household. And it doesn't mean that there can't be a case where there is a single parent household. Okay. There's circumstances, but the issue is that I don't agree I agree that in terms of the context of Christianity, I do agree that although these constitutional parameters are not biblical, but what is biblical is what is a family, right? What is biblical is what is a household, and a household is a man and a woman and their children, right? But that doesn't mean that the scriptures themselves don't recognize other configurations of a family in terms of widows running their homes, or someone who decides not to get married. You see, so that's basically what it is. So no, I don't believe it should be repealed. I don't think. I think that would, I mean, how do you go about repealing something like that? Would you have to do a con, what they call a con, or the whole, I really, I have no idea. I wouldn't trust repealing it anyways. The abuses can come out from that, but I would argue that fact that the 19th Amendment was put in place because of abuses, right? Women were not being seen, oftentimes, unfortunately for us, a lot of laws have come into place because there were abuses in place, right? And so now we have to have these languages that protect race and gender, all this stuff, because people abuse different races and different genders, right? There's a practicality of that that cannot be denied. And there's nothing wrong with that because they need to be protected, right? Absolutely. Where the scriptures protect women and genders and races in the scriptures inherently, you know, uh, outside of the Christian worldview, in a secularist worldview, these things have to be set in writing because they reject the implications of the scriptures. But the scriptures has always defended, uh, have always called humankind one race, that we're all part of the same race, that we all have the same creator, right? And the scriptures has always defended uh, women, has always defended fathers, that always defended mothers, always defended children, always defended people from different ethnicities all the time, and extended God's grace towards them. It's the secularism that does damage and needs to be redefined because of these things, right? So yeah, so that was a conversation on a larger conversation on Christian nationalism that that keeps popping up, and people. There are people that believe that we shouldn't be calling it Christian nationalism. Other people believe that, this wear it. Why not? If we hide it, it'll continue to be something that's a clubbed, that'll continue clubbing us over the head. Because of that, I tend to agree. I said, well, Christians can be nationalistic. Nothing wrong with that, you know. Uh, so yeah, so that's pretty much it for today's Divine Nature podcast. I believe I covered all of those things. Nevertheless, as I always say, secularism kills. And so let's stay on top of these things. And this episode was majorly in terms of politics, and but it always intersects with morality. Okay, so until next time, thanks for listening, and tune in next time to the Divine Nature podcast. Take care and God bless. All right, you're listening to the Divine Nature Podcast, a blog and cultural commentary ministry dedicated to declare the gospel of Jesus Christ, to reach out to those who have ears to hear by the power of the Holy Spirit. Check out divinenature.net for updates on blogs, videos, and more podcasts. And don't forget to share if you care. Until next time, God bless.